Genesis stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the baby monitor. Paul's voice crackled through it from the nursery. "I wish you were never born," he whispered coldly. A silence, then a soft giggle from the baby. Genesis's knees buckled, not from his words, but from what followed. A woman's voice replied to Paul from inside the room. "But you were the one who asked for him, remember?" Only she wasn't in the house, and that voice wasn't hers. The first time Genesis felt it, it wasn't the coldness in their bedroom or the silence during dinner. It was the way Paul passed by the baby's crib, like he didn't exist. 8 months ago, Paul had cried when their son was born. He held him like he was cradling the whole world. Now he walked past him like he was a piece of furniture. "Paul," Genesis said quietly one night, holding baby Ezra in her arms, "you haven't touched him all week." Paul didn't look up from his phone. "I'm tired." "He reached out to you this morning. You turned away." "I said I'm tired, Genesis." She stared at him, heart thumping. There was something deeper than exhaustion in his tone, something resentful. She didn't want to believe it, but the signs were stacking up. He avoided feeding Ezra. He slept on the far side of the bed. He flinched at the baby's cries like they were sirens. Genesis was no fool. She knew postnatal depression existed in men too, and that sometimes the stress of parenting broke people. But this felt like more. This felt intentional. That night, as she rocked Ezra to sleep, she whispered a promise. "I'll find out what's wrong, baby, even if it breaks me." But she didn't know yet. It already had. Genesis used to find peace in her evening showers. 10 minutes of warm solitude while Paul watched Ezra. But lately, the silence outside the bathroom had become unsettling. That night, as the steam rose and the water cascaded down her back, she paused. No baby sounds, no TV, no murmurs, nothing. She stepped out quickly, wrapped herself in a towel, and tiptoed down the hallway. The nursery door was ajar. Ezra was awake in his crib, eyes wide, quiet. And Paul, sitting in the dark corner, just staring. Not at Ezra, but at the wall. "Paul?" she whispered. His head turned slowly. "What? What are you doing in here?" He blinked, then stood. "Just thinking." "About what?" He walked past her, brushing her shoulder. "Nothing you'd understand." She glanced back at the crib. Ezra gave a little coo. That's when she noticed it. A small tear rolled down the baby's cheek. He hadn't made a sound. Had he been crying silently? Genesis picked him up, heart pounding. He clung to her like he hadn't been held in hours. "Did Daddy scare you?" she asked softly. She didn't expect an answer, but Ezra turned and looked toward the dark corner his father had been sitting in. And then he laughed. A deep belly laugh, the kind that didn't belong to a baby. Genesis froze. She checked again. Yes, he was still cooing and giggling, but behind those giggles, something didn't feel right. Later that night, while Paul slept beside her, she whispered into the dark, "Where did you go, Paul? What are you hiding?" But the real question, one she wasn't ready to ask yet, was this: who or what had taken his love away? Genesis searched for answers the only way she knew how, by retracing memories. She found herself opening drawers Paul hadn't touched in months, flipping through old photo albums, desperate to find something that connected the man he was to the man he'd become. In their bedroom closet, she noticed the family photo frame was gone, the one Paul had gifted her after Ezra's birth. She could still remember his words the day he gave it to her. "Frame this moment, because no matter what, it's us now." But it was gone. She rummaged through the laundry basket, the shelves, even under the bed, and there, tucked behind a pair of dusty shoes, was the frame. The photo had been ripped in half. Ezra's side was missing. Only Paul and Genesis remained, smiling, holding an invisible baby. Her hands trembled. Why would he do this? Later that night, she confronted him. "Where's the picture you gave me?" Paul didn't look up from his beer. "Must have fallen." "Don't lie to me." His jaw clenched. "You want to know the truth? I hate looking at it. I hate pretending everything's fine." "Why Ezra?" Her voice cracked. He looked at her with hollow eyes. "Because every time I look at him, I feel like I'm drowning in someone else's life." That night, Genesis slept with the torn half of the photo under her pillow. and a new question heavy in her chest. Was Ezra the mistake, or was she? The next morning, while Paul showered, Genesis did something she'd never done before. She unlocked his phone. He'd gotten sloppy. He hadn't changed the password. Scrolling through his call log, her heart began to race. A single number, unsaved, appeared more than 20 times in the last week. Late-night calls, midday calls, even one made at 3:12 a.m. She copied the number and dialed it on her own phone. Voicemail. A woman's voice. Soft, sultry, calm. "You've reached Eden. Leave a message." Genesis hung up, stomach churning. Who the hell was Eden? She typed the number into a search engine. Nothing came up. No business listing, no social profile. Just a number, hidden behind silence. When Paul stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, she was already seated on the edge of the bed, his phone in her lap. He froze. "You called someone named Eden at 3 a.m.?" she asked. He said nothing. "You're cheating?" Still silence. Then he spoke calmly, almost rehearsed. "You wouldn't understand. Eden helps me." "Helps you with what, Paul? Abandoning your own son?" He reached for the phone. "Don't do this." But Genesis stood first. "Don't bring strangers into our family. If there's something broken, we fix it, together." Paul looked her in the eye and said without blinking, "Some things aren't meant to be fixed." That night, Ezra didn't cry, not once. Genesis woke up twice in panic, heart racing, only to find him sleeping peacefully. Too peacefully. She hovered over the crib. His chest moved, barely. His skin was cold. She rushed to warm him, breath shaky. No fever, no signs of illness. But something was off. He wasn't responding to her voice. No smile, no coo. Just wide, glassy eyes staring at the ceiling. She called the doctor the next morning. Tests were scheduled. Paul didn't offer to come. "You're overreacting," he said. "Babies have moods." "Moods?" He didn't blink when I called his name. Paul shrugged. "Maybe he doesn't want to hear you." It felt like a dagger to the heart. Genesis held Ezra tighter and whispered, "You hear me, baby, don't you? You always hear me." Ezra turned. A slight smile. But behind that smile was a flicker of something else, like recognition, like he understood the war happening around him, like he wasn't really asleep all along. Desperate, Genesis booked a session with their old marriage counselor, Dr. Kemi Adesina. Paul refused to come. "I'm not paying someone to tell me how to feel," he said. So Genesis went alone. Dr. Kemi listened as Genesis poured out the last 8 months of slow decay. When she was done, the therapist leaned in. "Genesis, postpartum rage exists, but this sounds deeper. Paul's detachment, his language, his hostility, it's not just disconnection, it's rejection. Something shifted in him." "I know," Genesis whispered. "But why?" Dr. Kemi hesitated. "I had another couple once, same symptoms. The husband detached after their son's birth. Turns out the child wasn't his. He found out silently. Never said a word, just withdrew." Genesis reeled. "That's impossible. Paul is Ezra's father." The therapist nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe he thinks he knows something you don't." On the way home, Genesis couldn't breathe. Could Paul believe Ezra wasn't his? Had someone told him otherwise? But who? And why now? Paul was out. Genesis opened his laptop. It was always locked, but lately he'd been too careless. She used the same password as his phone and got in. What she found sent her into a spiral. A folder on the desktop labeled Truth. Inside, dozens of screenshots. Texts, emails, photos. One photo stopped her heart. It was a screenshot of a message from someone saved as Eden. "Told you. The timing doesn't add up. He's not yours." Another message. "You know what you have to do. You've already begun." Genesis dropped the laptop. Her hand flew to her mouth. Paul didn't just stop loving Ezra. He believed Ezra was someone else's child, and someone named Eden had fed that lie. That night, Genesis confronted Paul with the laptop open. "Is this why?" she demanded. "You think Ezra's not yours?" Paul's face tightened. "Don't act surprised." "I am surprised. How could you believe a stranger over your own wife?" "She's not a stranger." "Then who is she?" He hesitated. "She's someone I should have been with. Before you." The words hit Genesis like ice water. "You cheated on me before we married?" Paul didn't deny it. And you believe her over the son you held in your arms? He doesn't look like me, Paul said quietly. Genesis slapped him, hard. Then she whispered, "Get out." And he did, without a fight, without a word. Ezra stirred in the nursery. But this time, when Genesis looked into his eyes, she noticed something strange. They didn't just reflect Paul, they reflected someone else, someone she had buried in her past. Before Paul, there was Emmanuel, a childhood friend, her first love. They'd been engaged once, briefly, before she called it off after a devastating miscarriage. He vanished after that, or so she thought. Now, staring at Ezra's eyes, Genesis saw a glint of Emmanuel, the same birthmark on the left shoulder, the same eye shape, the same dimple. Her mind screamed no, but her heart whispered, what if? She dug through old photos, old letters, everything she had of Emmanuel. And there, in a long-forgotten envelope, was the proof she'd ignored for years, a letter, dated exactly 9 months before Ezra was born. She remembered the night, the wine, the grief, the comfort, the mistake. Genesis swore to herself she needed the truth. She couldn't let Ezra live under a shadow of suspicion, whether Paul stayed or not. She collected strands of Paul's hair, swabbed Ezra's mouth, and mailed it off to a private clinic. Fast, anonymous. Then she waited. Days felt like years. Paul didn't come home. He texted once, "You'll see I was right." But Genesis no longer cared what Paul thought. She cared about Ezra, about truth. The result came in an envelope, one sheet. Her hands shook as she opened it. She stared at the bold letters at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 1%. Ezra wasn't Paul's son, and suddenly the house felt darker than ever. Genesis didn't cry. She sat for hours, staring at the DNA results. It wasn't the lie that crushed her. It was the silence that followed it. How Paul knew and said nothing. How she had blocked out a memory so painful it rewrote her truth. She walked to the bathroom, face blank, and stared into the mirror. And then it happened. For a moment, just a flash. Her reflection didn't mimic her movement. She flinched. It smirked. She blinked. Back to normal. A trick of the mind, sleep deprivation, guilt. Still, she backed away. Then, from the nursery, Ezra began to laugh again. That deep, echoing laugh that didn't belong to a baby. She rushed in. He was standing, on his own, at only 8 months. Genesis screamed. Memories clawed their way back like ghosts. 9 months before Ezra's birth, after a charity gala Paul refused to attend, she drank wine with an old friend who showed up unexpectedly. Emmanuel. He was in town briefly, grieving his father. They talked about the miscarriage, about what could have been. She remembered the pain, the closeness, the wine, his hands, and then nothing. She thought they had parted with a hug. But what if it wasn't just a hug? What if that missing memory was intentional? Had she been drugged? Had she given in? Genesis called Emmanuel. The number was disconnected. The past had vanished, and yet lived on in her child's eyes. Paul returned to the house one rainy evening with a duffel bag and a dull expression. "I'm here for my things," he said. Genesis didn't argue, but then he added, "You got the results, didn't you?" She nodded. "You lied to me." "No, I lied to myself." He stared at her, then Ezra. "I should leave." "You already did." He turned to go, but paused at the door. "He said your name," Paul whispered. Genesis froze. "What?" "Last night, I dreamt of Ezra. He was older. He looked at me and said your name, not Mommy, Genesis, and he smiled like he knew me, like he was older than me." Then Paul added, almost trembling. He said, "I chose you. I chose her, but not him." Genesis began noticing strange things around the house. Ezra's toys were always moved, stacked in geometric patterns he was too young to understand. He no longer cried for milk. He waited for it, patiently, and he stared into corners, like someone was there. One night, while feeding him, she whispered, "Do you see something I don't?" Ezra's head turned sharply toward the hallway. Then he laughed, again, that same laugh. Genesis stood slowly and walked toward the hallway. A shadow moved. She followed. But when she turned the corner, no one was there, except the picture frame on the floor, cracked. It was a photo of Paul, but Ezra's face had been scratched out. Desperate for clarity, Genesis returned to her late father's study. He had been a pastor, a man who believed in spiritual truths and things people dismissed as myths. She hadn't touched his book since his death. Inside a locked drawer, she found a journal. His last entry read, "Some souls return not as themselves, but as conduits of justice or vengeance. Look closely at the eyes. They always give it away." Tucked inside the pages was a faded envelope. It was addressed to her, in shaky handwriting, "Open if your child ever feels different." She tore it open. Inside was a single sentence. "The one you carried may not be the one you birthed." Genesis needed to know who Eden was, not just the name, the person. She called in a favor from a friend in cybersecurity. Within hours, she had an address. A name, a face. Eden Obasi. She was stunning, mysterious, a counselor, a spiritualist, and most shockingly, Emmanuel's ex. Genesis drove across town to confront her. Eden opened the door like she'd been expecting her. "Finally," Eden said. "You're ready." Genesis didn't speak. "You've seen the signs, haven't you?" Eden asked. Genesis nodded. "I tried to warn Paul," Eden continued, "but he thought I was manipulating him." "What is Ezra?" Genesis whispered. Eden smiled faintly. "Not what, who?" Eden invited Genesis in. "Your child is not a child in the way you understand," she began. "There are souls that choose vessels. Ezra is one." "Chosen for what?" Eden didn't blink. Balance, correction, justice, or punishment. Genesis laughed bitterly. "He's just a baby." "Babies don't stand at 8 months. Don't laugh like that. Don't speak names in dreams." Genesis went pale. "You know about the dream?" Eden nodded. "He called you by your name." "What does it mean?" "It means he remembers who he is and who you are." Genesis stepped back. "You're crazy." Eden's voice dropped. "He also spoke another name in the dream, one Paul didn't recognize." Genesis frowned. "What name?" Eden met her eyes. "Obasi." That night, Genesis found Paul sitting in his car outside their home, staring at the rain. He looked unwell, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. She tapped the window. He didn't move. When he finally rolled it down, his voice was a whisper. "I saw him as a man." "In a dream?" "No, awake." Genesis's heart raced. He walked into our room, looked like me, but older, taller, stronger. He told me to leave, that I'd served my purpose. "And what is your purpose, Paul?" "To give you pain," he said. Then he looked at her, broken, hollow. "I think I was never supposed to be his father, just the key." "To what?" Paul's eyes filled with tears. "To unlocking you." That night, Genesis dreamed she was giving birth again. She was in a dim, ancient room alone. No doctors, no light. The baby came out screaming, not in pain, but in rage. A voice boomed, "You let him die. Now he has returned." She tried to scream, but no sound came. Then she saw a face appear through the blood and sweat. Emmanuel's face. He held the baby, smiled at her. "You called me," he said. Genesis woke up gasping. Ezra was in his crib, standing again, watching her. His mouth opened, but no baby noises came. Instead, he whispered, "Mother?" Genesis tracked down Emmanuel's sister, Adaiora, who lived 2 towns away. She didn't welcome Genesis warmly. "You left him," she said coldly. "You broke him." "I need his journal," Genesis pleaded. "Something strange is happening." Adaiora sighed. "You're not the only one." She returned with a black leather-bound book. He wrote in it every day after you left him. Genesis opened it and read entry after entry. Most were love letters, regrets. But the last one, weeks before Ezra's conception, read, "If I die and cannot return to her, then let my soul find a way. Through flame, through time, through blood. I will not be forgotten." Beneath it, a crude drawing of an infant, with black eyes and a smile. After reading Emmanuel's journal, Genesis sat in her car trembling. Through flame, through time, through blood. She looked at Ezra sleeping in his carrier, peaceful, innocent, or so it seemed. She remembered the birthmark on his shoulder, a crescent-like shape just below the collarbone. Emmanuel had the exact same one. She pulled gently at Ezra's onesie to expose it. There it was, faint but unmistakable. Her vision blurred. She whispered to herself, "You're not just his son." She reached for her phone. She needed someone, anyone, to confirm she wasn't losing her mind. But before she could dial, Ezra stirred, grabbed her wrist, and whispered in a voice that wasn't his, "Don't tell them." Genesis returned to Eden, clutching the journal. She slammed it on the table. "Is this what you meant?" Eden nodded slowly. Emmanuel's soul crossed. How is that even possible? There are paths, some born in grief, others in obsession. His love for you, it bled into something darker. He's possessing my child? Not exactly. He is your child, but with memory, with intent. Genesis paced. So what happens when he remembers everything? Eden hesitated. Then you'll have to choose. Choose what? To finish what death couldn't. Genesis stared, horror-stricken. "You're telling me to kill my son." "No," Eden said calmly. "I'm telling you to decide before he chooses you." That night, Genesis left the video baby monitor on for the first time in weeks, just to see. Ezra lay still until 3:13 a.m., then slowly he sat up and began to hum. A deep, low tune, not childish, not soft. It was a melody she hadn't heard in years. Emmanuel's melody, a song he wrote for her on their engagement night. Tears welled in her eyes. Ezra stopped, turned, looked directly into the camera lens, and smiled. The monitor screen flickered, then went dark, and one word echoed from the speaker, "Remember." Genesis called Paul back to the house. He arrived looking pale, thinner, haunted. "I need to know the truth," she said. Paul nodded. "I've been dreaming of him, Emmanuel, every night since Ezra was born." "You never met him." "But I've seen his face. He stands in the doorway. He doesn't blink." Genesis hesitated. "He says anything?" Paul swallowed. He said, "I was never enough. That he would finish what I started." "Started what?" Paul looked down. "I tried to kill myself, the night Ezra was born." Genesis froze. Paul continued, broken. "But something pulled me back, a voice. It said, 'She still needs you until the time is right.'" The following day, the heater stopped working. Then the lights began to flicker. The air turned icy even in midday. Genesis bundled Ezra and wrapped herself in layers, but he didn't shiver. In fact, he seemed more alive. He crawled to cold corners, reached for shadows, babbled toward empty spaces. Genesis lit candles. The flames bent sideways, toward Ezra. That night, the wall above his crib cracked. Tiny hairlines, forming words only she could read. "Do you love me now, Genesis?" She collapsed to the floor and sobbed into her hands. Eden arrived unannounced. "I need to try something," she said. Genesis hesitated, but allowed her in. Eden placed bowls of water, salt, and ash around Ezra. The baby didn't fuss. He watched, calm, still. Eden chanted softly in a dialect Genesis didn't recognize. Suddenly, Ezra cried out, not in pain, but in fury. He swatted the air. The bowls exploded. Water boiled. Salt sizzled. The ash flew into a whirlwind, and Ezra screamed, one word again and again, "Mine, mine, mine." Eden fell to her knees, shaken. "I'm too late," she whispered. "He's almost complete." Genesis dug back into her father's teachings, books on reincarnation, curses, spiritual anomalies. One page stood out. There are souls who cannot be named twice in the same lifetime. To do so awakens the former self. She understood now. Why Ezra never responded to Emmanuel. Why saying it in front of him changed the air. Why Eden had always called him the soul. Naming him was the trigger. She vowed she wouldn't speak it again, not even if it killed her. A man appeared at their doorstep, mid-50s, nervous, sweaty palms. "I'm Daniel, Emmanuel's father." Genesis froze. "I thought he died." "He did," Daniel said, "but something happened after." He handed her a USB drive. "Watch this. It was recorded 2 days before he died. He said you'd come looking." Genesis played the video. Emmanuel stared into the camera. "I'm going to find my way back to you, Genesis. I don't care what I become. I don't care who gets hurt." Then he smiled darkly. I'll return, even if it means wearing the face of an angel. Genesis rushed Ezra to the hospital after he began refusing food. Again, he didn't cry. The doctor ran tests. Everything came back perfect. Heart rate, optimal. Cognitive function, accelerated. Motor skills, advanced. Too advanced. The doctor, pale, said, "This isn't normal. This isn't human development." A nurse came in with a toy to distract him. Ezra didn't reach for it. He reached for the cross necklace around her neck and squeezed it. The chain burned her skin. She screamed. Genesis grabbed her son and fled the hospital. Back at home, Genesis collapsed. Not just from fear, but exhaustion, guilt, grief. She lay on the floor of the nursery, Ezra standing beside her. He patted her head. "Mama," he said. She looked up. His face was kind, loving even. And in that moment, she saw not Emmanuel, not vengeance, but Ezra, just her son. And it broke her. Tears flowed, her hands trembled. "I don't know who you are anymore." Ezra smiled and said one final thing before drifting off to sleep. "You will." Ezra's first birthday approached. Genesis didn't plan a party. No cake, no balloons, just dread. Paul showed up at the door without warning, holding a single candle. "We have to mark it," he said, "even if it's the end." Genesis let him in, saying nothing. At midnight, the moment Ezra was born a year ago, the lights flickered and the clock stopped. Ezra stood at the center of the living room, the candle in Paul's hand lit by itself. The flame burned black. Ezra smiled. Then he said in a man's voice, "Now I remember everything." Ezra walked across the room, like a grown man trapped in a child's body. He looked at Genesis, calm. "I tried to come back as your love," he said, "but fate gave me your son." Genesis backed away. "I never meant for this," she whispered. "You forgot me," he said, voice shaking. "You left me to die in pieces." "You left me first," Paul intervened. "Emmanuel, this isn't love. This is a curse." Ezra turned to Paul. "You were never part of the story. You were just the placeholder." Paul screamed in pain and collapsed, clutching his chest. Ezra didn't move. Genesis did. She ran to Paul. Ezra Emmanuel watched, silent and betrayed. Paul was rushed to the hospital with a mysterious heart condition. No explanation, no cause. The doctors were baffled. Genesis knew the truth. Ezra Emmanuel had attacked him without touching him. Back home, Genesis stared at her sleeping son. "Is this what love has become?" she whispered. "Punishment?" She remembered Eden's words. "You must choose, before he chooses for you." Could she kill her own child? Could she destroy the last piece of her greatest love? She began writing a letter, to Ezra, to Emmanuel, to herself. She signed it with a shaking hand. "I loved you before, but I love him now." Genesis returned to Eden one final time. "What do I do?" she asked. Eden handed her a small glass bottle filled with crimson liquid. "This will force a separation, but it must be willingly given." What happens to him? If Emmanuel's soul is too fused, he'll fade. But if he releases control, Ezra will stay. "And if I fail?" Eden looked away. "Then you lose them both." Genesis took the bottle and left. That night, she sat beside Ezra's crib, bottle in hand. "Do you trust me?" she asked. Ezra nodded slowly. Genesis uncorked the bottle and whispered a single name, Emmanuel. Thunder cracked outside. Wind howled through the nursery. Ezra's body convulsed. Screams filled the room, dozens of voices in one. The walls shook. Genesis held him tight. "You don't have to do this. Let him go." "I am him," the voices screamed. "No, you're Ezra. You were born of love, not grief, not revenge." Lightning struck the house. The candle reignited. Flames danced across the walls, but didn't burn. Ezra opened his eyes. One eye was brown, one was pure black. "Choose," he said. Genesis sobbed and kissed his forehead. "I choose you, not who you were, who you are." The kiss ignited the liquid Eden had given her. It poured through her lips into Ezra's. He screamed. The black eye turned white hot. Smoke rose from his skin. Memories surged. His, hers, theirs. The night they made love. The night he died. The night Ezra was born. She saw it all. Then, Silence. Ezra collapsed in her arms. No breath, no pulse. No, 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 please, she whispered. She pressed her face against his. I forgive you, Emmanuel. And then, a single gasp. Ezra inhaled, slowly opened both brown eyes. He looked up at her. Mommy? Ezra was 2. He no longer spoke in riddles. No strange laughs, no dream voices, just a toddler, wild, curious, beautiful. Paul moved back in. They started over, gently, cautiously. Therapy helped. But no one spoke of Emmanuel again, not out loud. But Genesis sometimes dreamed of him. He stood at a distance, watching, smiling, peaceful, and fading into mist. The last time she saw him in a dream, he whispered, "Thank you for letting me go." One day, Ezra wandered into the attic while playing. Genesis found him standing before a locked chest that hadn't been opened since her father died. He pointed at it. There's something inside, something for you. Genesis unlocked it. Inside was a baby blanket. Stitched on the corner in fading thread, Ezra. A name meaning help, for the one who'll heal your pain. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She held Ezra, he giggled, and in that moment, she believed. Ezra was always meant to be hers, not as punishment, but as healing. Months later, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No address, no sender name, just a wax seal. A black crescent moon. Genesis opened it. Inside, one sentence. Souls can return through pain, but only love can set them free. And below that, a new line had appeared in her father's old journal, though no one had touched it in years. The fire of rebirth will always leave ashes, but from those ashes, life still blooms. She closed the book and smiled. At night, Genesis often found herself staring into Ezra's eyes, searching, wondering, was Emmanuel truly gone, or did he leave behind a fragment, a memory, a whisper? One evening, as she tucked Ezra in, he looked up and said, "Mommy?" "Yes, baby?" He smiled gently. "You're my favorite forever." She paused, heart racing. Ezra closed his eyes and slept peacefully. And as she walked away, she whispered into the dark, "Mine too." It had been months of peace. No strange dreams, no voices, no shadows. Then, one evening, Genesis heard it, a faint whisper behind Ezra's nursery wall. She pressed her ear closer. Nothing. She laughed it off, until she found Ezra the next morning, drawing strange symbols on the floor with crayon. Symbols she had seen once before, in Emmanuel's journal. "Where did you learn this, baby?" she asked. Ezra blinked. "The man in the wall told me." Her blood ran cold. "Did he have a name?" Ezra nodded. "But he said you already knew it." Paul had grown into fatherhood again. He smiled more, laughed, loved Ezra with real warmth now, but guilt still lived in him. He confessed it during a late-night talk with Genesis. "I wanted to leave before Ezra was born. I didn't think I could love anything again after losing my job, my dreams. You were the only light left." She listened quietly. "I blamed Ezra for a life I lost," he whispered. "But the truth is, he gave me a new one." Genesis took his hand. "We all broke," she said. "But somehow we put the pieces back." Or so she thought. Another letter arrived. Same seal, black crescent moon. Inside, "The vessel may heal, but the soul must rest." It was signed, Eden. Genesis called the number she once used to contact Eden. Disconnected. She visited the house again. Abandoned, empty, dust-covered. Inside, a single photo hung on the wall. It was her and Emmanuel. But the faces had been scratched out. Only Ezra's remained, superimposed on a child's body in the corner. A date scrawled in pencil, next blood moon. It was 3 days away. The night of the blood moon came with eerie calm. The sky turned red. Ezra slept peacefully. But Genesis couldn't. She watched the moon through the nursery window, praying it meant nothing. At exactly midnight, Ezra sat up in bed, eyes wide open. "Mommy," he said. "He's back." Genesis rushed to him. "Who?" Ezra pointed to the mirror, and there, clear as glass, stood Emmanuel. Not vengeful, not dark, just present. He mouthed words she couldn't hear. Ezra repeated them. "Thank you for giving me a home." Then the mirror cracked. That night, Genesis dreamt of a wide field of light. In the distance stood Emmanuel holding a baby, Ezra. But Ezra was newborn again. Emmanuel kissed the baby, laid him gently on the ground, and walked away, toward the horizon. He looked back once, smiled, and vanished into sunlight. When Genesis awoke, she found Ezra curled against her chest. The room smelled like wildflowers, and for the first time in a year, there was peace. Weeks later, a small box arrived, no return address. Inside was a carved pendant, half gold, half obsidian. With it came a note. Every soul needs an anchor. Yours is love, his is you. E. Genesis wore the pendant around her neck from that day forward. It warmed when Ezra smiled, and it chilled when danger neared. It was as if someone, or something, was still watching, but not to harm, to protect. A journalist came to do a piece on unexplained maternal connections. Genesis almost declined, but she agreed. During the interview, the journalist asked, "What would you tell other mothers struggling with strange changes in their children?" Genesis paused, then said, "Sometimes our children carry more than our blood. They carry stories, echoes, wounds we never healed. Don't fear it, walk with it, and love them anyway." The article went viral. Mothers from around the world reached out. Some had stories, some had scars. All had questions they never dared ask until now. Ezra's third birthday was full of light. Sunshine, laughter, no shadows. Paul carried him on his shoulders. Genesis baked the cake herself. But as she tucked Ezra in that night, he looked up and asked, "Mommy, if I go far away someday, will you come find me?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "Always, baby." He smiled, kissed her nose, and closed his eyes. That night, she didn't dream, but the pendant around her neck glowed softly, like a heartbeat. Genesis returned to her father's journal one last time. She flipped to the end, where blank pages once were. A final message had appeared. Some souls come back for revenge, some come back for love, but the rarest come back to remind us who we are. She pressed the book to her chest. No fear remained, only gratitude and awe. Years passed. Ezra grew strong, kind, brilliant. Paul became a father in every sense. One evening, as the three of them sat under the stars, Ezra pointed up and said, "There he is." "Who?" Genesis asked. Ezra leaned against her. "Just someone who helped me find you." Paul smiled and held them both. In that moment, Genesis understood. It was never about who Ezra had been. It was about who he chose to become. And in choosing to stay, he saved them all.